Good morning, everybody. This is Stephen Pugh of the Home Bible College. I want to do another lecture in my series on the Gospel for the first year students of the Home Bible College. And this one is lecture number 38, and it's on the subject of tact. Tact. Now, that's a very interesting concept. Tact is one of the most difficult things to describe initially. It's not a word that we use all the time, but it's something which is so essential in an evangelist. Anybody that has the job of preaching the gospel or witnessing for the Lord needs to have tact. In fact, recently I looked it up to discover what the dictionary actually described tact as, and it said that it was a skill and sensitivity in dealing with other people, or especially with difficult issues. And of course, the preaching of the gospel is a sensitive issue. It's an issue between God and man. It's an issue, it's probably the most important issue that a lot of people will ever really have to face. So let's look at those two concepts, but in reverse order. I'm going to talk first of all about sensitivity. Now, I describe sensitivity as the ability to feel and to empathize with another person. It is the ability to understand another person in how they think about themselves, and what is their personal worldview. You'll be surprised that there is such a thing as a Christian worldview, and there's also a non-Christian worldview. And if you're going to communicate the gospel to somebody, the most important thing you're going to have to do is to understand how they think. Your job is to diagnose the person that you're speaking to. Let me tell you a story. Many years ago, when I was quite a young man, I was a Christian. I didn't know very much, but I was a Christian just about. And a dear old gentleman called Mr. Warren used to meet me very often on the way to church. And every time he met me, he used to try to lead me to Christ. Now, this was sweet, and it was noble of him to do this. We admire his faithfulness in trying to talk to me about the Lord. But what he missed was is that I was already a Christian. And so he hadn't really taken the time, bless him, to listen and to find out really whether I was a Christian. What he had done is he had become so used to talking to people about the Lord, and so used to using the particular phraseology that he used, that every time he met anybody, they had exactly the same information communicated, irrespective of their spiritual state. C.H. Spurgeon, in one of his famous books, he used to talk about a phrase called great cry and little wool. Great cry, little wool. And then the subtitle was, said the man who sheared the pig. Of course, you should be shearing the sheep, not the pig. And if you try to shear the pig, you're going to have a great cry in little wool. It would be comical, wouldn't it, to think of that if it wasn't tragic. Now, skill is the ability to correctly apply oneself to another person. With the use of carefully thought out questions, it is important to try to discover who the person is that you're talking to, and first of all, whether or not they're saved at all. It's no good communicating the gospel to somebody that's already a Christian. That would be a rather foolish thing to do. So we need to be sensitive, and we need to be careful. Now, careful, you see, not everyone will understand the words that you use, and you may not understand the words that they use. It was said of Martin Luther that he would spend a lot of his time down in the marketplace every day listening to how men talked, and listening to what words they use and what concepts they had. And that's very important. It's very important for an evangelist to be able to understand people. You need to understand what they do, what they think, what words they use. The more clearly you can understand people, the more you will be able to then very skillfully explain the gospel correctly. Not everybody will understand the concepts that you want to communicate. Your job, your primary job, is to listen enough to be able to understand their spiritual state and to help them to listen to you in order for them to understand your simple message. I'll tell you a little story. I remember on one occasion we'd been having some meetings in a house and 2 or 3 people had come to know the Lord there and then. And the following week we decided that we'd call all the same people together and we'd review what we talked about, and we'd review what I call follow-up, and we'd find out what they thought of it, and we'd find out what they thought about what they'd heard. I knew that they were Christians good enough, but I just needed to check a few things to make sure they were understanding things properly. And I said to this one lady, I said, "Can I ask you a question?" She said, "Yes, certainly, Stephen, anything." I said, "When you became a Christian last week, did you think that you were becoming a Christian because you repeated certain set phrases?" And she said, "Yeah, of course. That's what you told us to do. You told us to pray after you, and I prayed after you, and because I said those words, I was going to be a Christian." And I said, right. I think I might have communicated the wrong impression to you. I mean, your spiritual experience is probably good enough. But you didn't become a Christian because you said some words. You became a Christian because you believed in the Lord Jesus for yourself. And she said, "Oh, well, yeah, I believe that too. I really do believe Jesus Christ died for me. But I thought that I was becoming a Christian because I said certain phrases and certain words." I said, no, I'm afraid people don't become Christians because they say something. People become Christians because they believe something. Now do you see the difference? And she went, now I understand. You see, she was a Christian good enough. We believed that she was a Christian, fine, but I had probably conveyed an incorrect meaning. Okay? An incorrect instruction. Now let me give you another example. Most of you, I expect, are familiar with a book called Pilgrim's Progress. If you're not familiar with it, I recommend it to you. I highly recommend it to you. I want to tell you about a little incident that occurs in the story of Christian. And it's an allegory. It's a long story. It's like a sort of a pictorial story of the Christian life. And Christian is a person, he's under conviction, he knows he's not right with God, he has a big book in his hand, and he's wandering away from the city of destruction, and hopefully he's going to be going towards the celestial city. But he meets a man on the road, and this man is called Mr. Evangelist. And he asks Christian whether he can see the wicket gate. Now the wicket gate in the story would be that place that a person gets to in which when they go through the gate, they are actually a Christian from then on. And he says to Christian, he says, "Can you see the wicket gate?" And Christian says, "No, I can't see it at all." So Mr. Evangelist says, "Well, can you see a little light ahead of you, a little light in the distance?" And Christian looks and squints and he says, "Yes, I think so." So Mr. Evangelist says, "Well, you keep going forward towards the light and you will eventually find the way to the wicket gate." Now that's a very telling story. And what it describes is the fact that very often when we're talking to people about the Lord, they can't quite see it. They can't quite see it. But they've got a little bit of light. And they're going to follow that little bit of light, and the light may become stronger and stronger until eventually they get to a point where they see the way to become a Christian. And then what a glorious event that is. I have had people come to hear me preach. I spoke to a lady in my church quite a long time ago, and she said to me, she threw me completely. was like a curveball. I was completely taken by surprise. She says, Stephen, I like you, but she says, I don't understand a word you're talking about. Now there's a lesson for any pastor, any evangelist, isn't it? And I was very concerned about this, and I was praying about it, and I was asking the Lord what could be done. And I continued in my ministry, and it wasn't long after that she came to me and she said, Stephen, she said, you're so easy to understand. I understand completely now. I couldn't understand anything at the beginning, but I understand now. I understand exactly what you're talking about. And she said, I really enjoy listening to you. Now let me ask you, was it just language that she didn't understand? Well, probably. Was it the concepts that I was trying to communicate that she didn't grasp? Yes, probably. Was it just my mode of speaking, my accent? Yeah, probably. You see, sometimes we have to just keep going. We have to listen a lot, and we have to try to explain in the most simple way that we can, using the most simple concepts so that people can understand. So this is what tact is. Tact, as I said at the very beginning, is the ability, okay, to have sensitivity and skill in dealing with people, and especially in sensitive issues. And of course, preaching the gospel is a sensitive issue. This is about heaven and hell. This is about life and death. We need to be able to make people understand at least what we're saying. Even if they don't necessarily become a Christian, they need to understand very clearly what's being said. And that's the challenge of an evangelist. The challenge of an evangelist is that you need to have tact. Okay? You need to have sufficient sensitivity and skill to be able to help people who don't know what on earth you're talking about to understand you. Well, there you are. This is the next one in our series on evangelism, and we look forward to catching up with you next week. And God bless you all. Bye for now.